All right, welcome everyone to the Brothers Brawl podcast. Levi, how are you this evening?
Doing well. Bit tired, but doing well.
Good to hear. Good to hear.
How are you, Blake?
You know, I'm doing all right myself. I'm incredibly excited because today we get to talk about something that I think is near and dear to both of our hearts. Levi, why don't you go ahead and tell them a
little. So excited! Innistrad Midnight Hunt is here. This is the first in the two-set block, I guess I'm going to call it.
Sure.
Innistrad block that we're getting this fall. This one is all about them werewolves, which, as you know, Blake, is my favorite tribe in Magic.
It looks amazing. Absolutely. And as you can see from the fantastic artwork here from Wizards of the Coast, we have a werewolf on the cover, so clearly very prominent. So, what we thought we'd talk about here, starting out with Innistrad Midnight Hunt, are the new commanders from the set. And there are a handful of them that look amazing for Historic Brawl. And starting out with kind of the werewolf theme here, Levi, you want to talk a little bit about Tovalar, Dire Overlord, and Tovalar, the Midnight Scourge?
Absolutely, I do. So this is getting commander players, brawl players, everything they've ever wanted. This works as a werewolf commander. I'm going to split off into commander a little bit here. Works with the old version of werewolves. So if they ever introduce them in Historic Horizons, or not Historic Horizons, Historic Anthology, or if they ever bring back old sets, this will work with the old version of werewolves. Now that I've got that out of the way, we can actually talk about the commander. So, Tovalar, Dire Overlord is a 3/3 human werewolf that casts for 1 generic and a red and a green. It's a legendary creature that reads, whenever a wolf or werewolf you control deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 3 or more wolves and or werewolves, it becomes Knight. Then transform any number of human werewolves you control. And he has Daybound. Talk about that in a second. On his backside, he is Tovalar, the Midnight Scourge, and he is a legendary creature werewolf. Whenever a wolf or werewolf you control deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. And X and red-green, target wolf or werewolf you control gains +X/+0 and gains trample until end of turn, and Nightbound.
Wow.
So, just an amazing card. What a powerhouse.
Yeah.
Let's break it down. So, first thing, Daybound and Nightbound abilities. How these new werewolves work is if a player has cast no spells last turn, it becomes Night. If it is Night and a player casts more than 2 spells, it then becomes Day. And Day and Night trigger what side the new werewolves come in. Now, if you don't know, werewolves are flip cards. They transform. Transform mechanics were originally popularized in original Innistrad here, where we got to see werewolves and vampires have a back side to the card, which is super interesting. It becomes a day when a daybound creature enters the battlefield. So that triggers it becoming day. That's what the daybound ability is. And if it is day when you cast it, you cast it on the daybound side. If it is night when you cast it, you cast it on the nightbound side. I believe that's how that works.
Yeah, I think you're correct on that. And on top of that, we'll get to this in another video, but there's a lot of support pieces from the set to assist your werewolf or even just daybound, nightbound themed decks in order to get it to the side that you want. And we'll talk about that in another video, but wow, this looks like a sweet commander.
Yes. So not only does he just have good base stats, 3/3 for 3, can't complain about that. If he does flip over, he's a 3 for a 4/4, which is insane in a not 40 life format like Commander, not 20 life format like Historic or Standard. In Historic Brawl 25, 4/4 gets in some work, especially if you can get him down on turn 3 when a lot of players are ramping still.
Yeah.
Other thing that's super important about this card, it says draw card on it. Immediately makes it better.
Absolutely. I love whenever do X, draw a card. Oh, it makes your life amazing.
Especially in this one, because it is whenever a wolf or werewolf you control deals combat damage. It means if I'm attacking you with 5 werewolves and they all deal combat damage, that's 5 cards in hand. Pretty busted.
Yes, absolutely.
So he keeps that ability on both sides. On the front side is where it becomes really relevant. It's at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 3 or more wolves and werewolves, it becomes night, then transform everything. That's great, because you will have werewolves that are not transformed. And having this condition where you get to transform all of your werewolves at once can just be a huge swing in your favor, because all of them get better stats, get better abilities on the backside. All of them just get much, much more powerful. And this is a pretty easy condition to hit, given that your commander counts as one of them, or your general counts as one of them. That means you only need 2 more and you can get everything to flip.
Yeah, that's a great point. Wow.
So again, want to mention that this does work with the old version of werewolves if they ever decide to add them in, which please add them in, because I would love to see the old style werewolves in this game as well.
Absolutely.
But on the backside is where we get really crazy. When we get a built-in Kessig Wolf run into the commander, that combined with the card draw ability just blows my mind. So, to those of you who don't know, Kessig Wolf Run was a land from Innistrad that let you do this ability, where it's X, red, green, target wolf or werewolf you control against +X +O and trample till end of turn. Wasn't conditionalized to wolves or werewolves. They did that for this card, but that got really powerful, because when you combine that with infinite mana or just a large amount of mana, you can get in for some serious damage, given that it gives trample.
Yeah, ramping in red and green.
Yeah, given that red and green primarily is the color of ramp here, we see this getting out of hand very quickly.
Absolutely. Well, Levi, if it's all right with you, I'd like to transition to another werewolf card here.
Absolutely.
So the next card that we'd like to talk about, and I included the just amazing art here, is Arlen the Pax Hope and Arlen the Moon's Fury. Now, Arlen Cord is a planeswalker we've seen before a couple times. But Levi, tell me a little bit about this new Arlen.
Yeah, so Arlen Cord is a planeswalker who was originally a Cathar on Innistrad, turned werewolf, but she kept her sentience and sanity when she would transform. So she ended up becoming a pack leader. We've seen flip Arlens before. We've seen just non-flip Arlens in War of the Spark. This one seems to be the best out of all of them right now, from what we can tell, without actually playtesting. Obviously, can't really get a good read, but this one seems to be pretty powerful. So Arlen Pax Hope is the front side of this card, and it is a 4 loyalty planeswalker that casts for 2 generic, a red and a green. It is a legendary planeswalker, Arlen, with Daybound on its front side, and then a +1 ability that says until your next turn you may cast creature spells as though they had flash, and each creature you control enters the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. A -3 that says create 2 2/2 green wolf creature tokens. Nightbound side, with the Nightbound ability, obviously, and a +2 to add red and green mana, and a 0 ability. Until end of turn, Arlen the Moon's Fury becomes a 5/5 werewolf creature with trample, indestructible, and haste. So, let's break it down. First, I'm happy to say that I love your inclusion of the autumn border on here. It is just absolutely stunning.
It looks good.
Front side, pretty strong. Again, I think this is built with old werewolves and the new werewolves in mind, giving stuff flash, meaning you can skip your turn and have it become night and then cast spells on other people's turns. That's really powerful ability. Not to mention that everything enters with an additional +1/+1 counter. That's just strong right there. For the -3, creating 2 2/2 green wolf creature tokens, that's pretty good. That creates 2 blockers that are not insignificant power and toughness on a -3. You're making 4 power for 3 loyalty. Not a bad trade-off. On the Knight side, it's 2 mana for a +2 ability. Just seems strong. Always good to have mana ramp on there. Interesting that they included that on the Knight side. I would have thought that would definitely be more of a day side ability, but I'm here for it. And then the 0, making her a 5/5 werewolf with trample, indestructible, and haste. That's strong, I think. 5/5 with haste, trample, and indestructible is not insignificant on turn 4.
Yeah, you make a good point about the +2 ability on the Nightbound side with adding mana. I think we typically see that as kind of a +2 on not double-faced planeswalkers, add mana, that kind of a thing. I believe there's a Domri planeswalker that has that ability. Maybe because of the fact that the 0 ability is kind of powerful, being able to be turn into that werewolf creature with trample, indestructible, and haste. Do you think that's why they added the +2 to the Nightbound side, Levi?
Yeah, definitely think so. The other reason is I'm glad it's a +2 because that'll help keep the Arlen alive. With only a +1 on the backside, I think it probably would die fairly often. That's just my take on that.
Well, you also made a great point about the create 2/2/2 green wolf creature tokens. Now that's a mouthful to say. With it protecting Arlen, worst case scenario, if your Arlen dies the turn after you cast it, you still have 4 power for 4 CMC, essentially.
Yeah, very strong. Especially if we're doing a werewolf build around. In this, there is, we'll talk about this later in the cards in the 99 section, but there are werewolf lords. Wolf and werewolf lords in this set, which is a very interesting thing that we see the werewolf lords also buff wolves. We saw that in original Innistrad as well with cards like Immerwolf, but I digress. I just think that's very interesting.
That is really interesting. Well, I can't wait to talk about that as well.
Yeah.
So, Levi, I've got a tough question for you. And this is a real tricky one here, or maybe it's not. Would you use Arlen the Pax Hope or Tovalar Dire Overlord as your commander? Who's the preferential commander?
That is a very tough choice. If you pick one or the other one's in the deck. I think that's a no-brainer there. It honestly depends for me. We haven't seen all the spoilers yet. We're recording this on the Monday, the 6th here, so we haven't gotten a whole lot of spoilers yet. So we will see how many flip werewolves there are in green and red. Because if there is not a whole lot of... If there is not, I'm going to say, a critical mass of at least 30 flip werewolves, I think you go with Arlen, because the first ability, the transforming ability, isn't necessarily as relevant, and making power and toughness with wolves and being able to turn Arlen into a creature is relevant. But I do really like Tolvalar for that card draw. That card draw can get very mean very quickly. And honestly, even if we don't hit that critical mass, I think that might just be worth it. But it's definitely a consideration. It's a toss-up. We'll wait to see on the spoilers. But for now, I'm going to say Tolvalar.
Wow, okay. Well, I can't wait to see your werewolf deck in action in Historic Brawl. We'll have to do a video of that here.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's move on to another commander here from the new set with some phenomenal art. Giza, Glorious Resurrector. 2 of any color and 2 black for a legendary creature, human wizard. She's a 4/4. She also is a recurring character here from Magic's past. If a creature an opponent controls would die, exile it instead. So that's pretty great for the historic format where there's a lot of graveyard recursion, to the point where, even having a Hive of the Eye Tyrant where you're exiling creatures every time you attack is worth it. At the beginning of your upkeep, put all creature cards exiled with Giza, Glorious Resurrector, onto the battlefield under your control. They gain Decayed, which is if this creature attacks, sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. So the first thought that I had is it kind of reminds me of the Turgrid decks that we're seeing in the queues now, where you're essentially stealing your opponent's stuff. Now, obviously, this requires, instead of having discard or sacrifice, it's just simply killing opponent's creatures, which Black does very, very effectively. And then stealing it for that single attack, which could be all the difference in the game. What do you think, Levi?
Yeah, I think this is very interesting, and I think you're right. This does remind me a lot of Turgrid. One thing that I find interesting, first, this goes in a Turgrid deck, and I think Turgrid goes in a Giza deck. I think they complement each other very well. One thing that strikes me as odd, and this is just a random thought, that it doesn't work if they exile. So if you use an exile spell on them, like Vraska's Contempt, that doesn't get you that creature back. So it won't be able to hit any of the indestructible creatures that we're seeing in Historic, which there is a non-zero amount of.
Yeah.
Otherwise, this card just seems... I can't find the downside besides the one attack, and that's what concerns me. Like, this is a rare that we're going to see, I think, a lot of here.
Yeah, I agree. I think Decayed is supposed to make it more fair, but I don't know. I mean, especially in Historic Brawl. Now in Standard, which this set is essentially designed for, in Standard, I would say that kind of can make a difference here, but with Historic, I feel like some of the power level of the creatures and power level of the decks that I've been playing against, every card in there is a bomb. So...
Not to mention that this just hoses graveyard decks. You're playing a Scarab God deck? That sucks, doesn't it? Like,
yeah,
you're playing Corvold. That's a shame.
That
it's just such an FU.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Well, I imagine that we're going to be seeing this at the very least in every single Turgrid deck out there. All right. Moving on, we have Sagarda Champion of Light. 1 of any color, 1 green, and 2 white for a 4/4 flying trample legendary creature angel. Again, with this beautiful, beautiful artwork here. Humans you control get +1/+1, so it's a human lord. Coven, which is a new mechanic. Whenever Sagarda attacks, if you control 3 or more creatures with different powers, look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may reveal a human creature card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So the first piece of it is a 4/4 for 4 that has flying and trample, which are very, very solid stats for an angel here. Humans you control get +1/+1, so it's a human lord, assuming that we're probably going to see some human tribal decks with this. And then the Coven mechanic, which is if you control 3 or more creatures with different powers, whenever Sagarda attacks, you essentially get a card. Assuming that you are making that human tribal deck. Again, I think this really slots into either the 99 of a human tribal deck, or is probably quite often the commander of the human tribal deck. Now, Levi, the question is, does this beat out the Ikoria legendary who is escaping me for the human lord?
That's a tough one. I like the card draw on this. Card draw just always interests me. Card draw on Sagarda I think is going to be a major beneficial factor over General Kudrow here. General Kudrow, while buffing all humans, has a little bit of a weak ability on his static ability, in the 2 and sacrifice 2 humans, destroy target creature, power 4 or greater, is strong. I just think Sagarda's better because it's a better creature overall, with the stat line being a 4/4 flying trampler versus a 3/3 on the ground. And that Coven ability to get some cards in hand. That's my take on this. What do you think, Blake?
I'd have to agree with your assessment. I think the support for green-white humans is probably pretty close to black-white humans. I know that Strixhaven had a handful of very solid black and white humans, but I think just overall, in general, there's enough humans to go around, and the power level of Sagarda is a little bit higher than General Kudro, with card advantage and just being a better creature. Now, I think being able to sacrifice your humans maybe makes it a better aristocrats-style commander. So if you're looking for aristocrats in black and white with humans, although typically speaking, if we're going to go tribal with aristocrats, I think we usually see vampires or zombies. So
the other thing I want to mention is that I do think the Sagarda is going to be strong because we are in the color of ramp. And I think in 100 card singleton that makes a difference when we get green in a pool, because that means we can run cards like Cultivate, which is just an all-star in any 100 card singleton format. So
Agreed. Okay. All right, moving on to the next commander, we have Serith the Viper's Fang, which is 2 of any color, 2 green for a 3/4 legendary creature, human warlock, so maybe even in the 99 of Sagarda, it's a human. Other tapped creatures you control have Death Touch. Other untapped creatures you control have Hexproof. And you can pay 1 and tap Serith to untap another target creature or land you control. So just to kind of give a little bit of color around how this would function. So assuming that your creatures don't have Vigilance, which means that they would don't tap when they attack. If your creatures are untapped and they haven't attacked yet, they have Hexproof, so your opponent can't target them with spells or abilities. When you attack, then they all gain Death Touch, which means that it's kind of a pain to block them as they blow up your opponent's creatures. And then if you want to, what you could do as a fun combat trick, if your opponent targets your best creature with a removal spell, you can pay 1, tap Serith, and untap that creature to give it Hexproof in order to save it from that removal spell. So Levi, what do you think about Serith as a commander?
Very strong, I think. So you mentioned the trick you can do to untap another creature or land. I think that's very relevant. Being able to give things instant speed hexproof is pretty strong.
Agreed.
Other thing is, as a commander, I think it would be very interesting, given all your creatures Death Touch and just swinging in. That makes cards like that we see in a lot of green decks now, like Llanowar Elves, very strong, because it can turn from a mana dork into a pretty efficient attacker very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing where I think this gets really real is in a Finn the Fangbearer deck, giving your Death Touch creatures Infect.
Wow. Yeah. Finfect is a deck that I've been wanting to try out personally, just because it's a very cruel thing to play against when you lose to poison counters. So
that is very fair, and it seems on brand for you. But I think this makes Finfect, as you have adorably titled it, very strong, and I think there's going to be a whole lot of synergy between this. Otherwise, even as a standalone card, I can see this being a pain to deal with. Decks I run that would suffer to this is pretty much all of them, because all of my decks that I run hate blocking Death Touchers. They want to gum up the board, and if everything has Death Touch, that's a very, very bad way to gum up the board, because all your stuff just trades. So
yeah, you make a good point that this, in the 99 or as a commander is kind of a all-around threat, as it gives your creatures hexproof, so it kind of hoses control a little bit, or mid-range with a lot of removal. And then from the creature-heavy decks, typically speaking, don't want to block things with Death Touch. So you make a great point about it just probably being an inclusion in a lot of decks that have green.
Yeah. The only downside to this is that it itself does not have hexproof, given that it says other untapped creatures. Mm. So I can definitely see this being the target of many a removal spell. Meaning that I honestly think as a commander it gets devalued a bit, because I don't think you're landing this on the board till you're paying around 8 mana for it. So
yeah. All right. Well, moving on from Serith here, we have Jadar, Ghoul Caller of Nephalia. Levi, do you want to go ahead and read this one?
Absolutely. Jadar, Ghoul Caller of Nephalia is cast for 1 generic, 1 black mana. So legendary creature, human wizard with 1 power and 1 toughness. With an ability that reads at the beginning of your end step, if you control no creatures with Decayed, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token with Decayed. Decayed being, it can't block. When it attacks, sacrifice it at end of combat. I think this card is pretty strong. Having a 2-mana commander that makes a 2/2 on entry, I think Aristocrats is going to love it.
Yes, absolutely. I will say this. I think we're going to see this a lot more just in general zombie tribal in like a Narfi Betrayer King. Narfi, is that the name? Narfi. We'll say
yep.
Narfi.
Narfi. It is Narfi. Yep.
What a funny name. And
indeed,
I just think the 1 power, 1 toughness is just too weak. It's going to die to every removal that exists.
Oh, yeah. I don't actually think we're going to see a whole lot of commander, but of Jadar being the commander, but I think this slots into Aristocrats. This is definitely going in my core vault brew. This slots in Narfi zombies. If we get any other good zombie tribal cards from that, like zombie commanders from Midnight Hunt, I think this slots right in there as well. Making a 2/2 body every turn that can be sacrificed is not insignificant for Aristocrats, and if you're playing Narfi, that's a 3/3 every turn that can just kind of beat face.
Yeah, that is a dang good point. Next up, this card has been spoiled for a little while, but I wanted to include it on our list here. Ren and Seven, which is a legendary planeswalker. We've seen Ren and 6 before. This is the next iteration. 3 of any color and 2 green to cast for 5 loyalty. Now, Ren and 7 has 4 abilities. Its +1 ability is reveal the top 4 cards of your library and put all land cards revealed this way into your hand and the rest in your graveyard. 0 ability is put any number of land cards from your hand onto the battlefield tapped. -3 is create a green treefolk creature with reach, and this creature's power and toughness are equal to the number of lands you control. And then the -8 or ultimate ability is return all permanent cards from your graveyard to your hand, and you get an emblem with you have no maximum hand size. Whew, that's a lot of text. Levi, what do you think about the power of Ren and 7?
Very strong. We're going to go in a little bit of a weird order. Let's talk about the -3. That -3, it does not create a legendary green tree folk. That means you can do it again and again. It means you are getting a spell from Eldritch 7 mana on a -3 ability.
Yeah.
If you remember the giant from Eldraine that let you adventure search up a land and then its power and toughness were equal to the number of lands you controlled,
Yep.
It was a 7 mana spell. You're getting that at a discounted rate here because you're not only paying 5 for the Ren and 7, but it doesn't kill the Ren and 7 when you -3 here. I think that's probably the best ability on this Planeswalker, maybe even better than the ult because you can activate it right away. Just a little bonkers.
Wow. Yeah.
+1 gets you lands. It's just so good. In green, that is amazing, especially with landfall triggers. That's just very, very, very strong. What do you think about the 0 and the ultimate, Blake?
You know, I will say the 0 piece of it seems like it's going to be less relevant than you would think. Because if you're already paying 5 mana, you probably have emptied your hand of lands, or you're just playing, as you're drawing lands. Now, mind you, in green, there are a lot of cards that tutor up lands to your hand, so it could be more relevant than I'm assuming. Now, if you're playing Ren and 7 as your commander, you are playing a lands matter deck or a graveyard lands deck, so that could definitely be a build-around piece of it, so that 0 is more powerful than you would assume. The -8, while it may be a little bit weaker for an ultimate to be able to return all your permanent cards from your graveyard to your hand is great card advantage, assuming that you're, again, playing this as your commander and getting a lot of cards into your graveyard, and having the Reliquary Tower emblem, so you have no maximum hand size. I will say that, even though when you hit an ultimate, you're kind of assumingly winning the game. That card advantage is pretty amazing. And again, building around Ren and Seven as a commander where your cards are hitting the graveyard, that could be this seriously destructive finisher because you have all of these amazing cards that just jump back into your hand. Now, I will say this. What do you think, Levi? Is this a in the 99 for the most part or a commander?
That's a bit tough. Given that it's mono green, my immediate instinct is to say in the 99, just because I've only seen maybe a handful of monocolored decks in the historic Brawl queues, most of them being goblins in some iteration or another. And I don't know if we have the support in mono green to make this an insane commander, especially when it's a graveyard lands commander, which we don't have a lot of support for right now. So my instinct is to say in the 99, but this card is also just kind of bonkers powerful. It has a little bit of a do-all aspect to it, and I really like that. I agree with you. I think the 0 is going to be less relevant than you'd think, but the times that it is relevant is going to blow people out.
Yeah.
And that's what gets me interested. My problem is all the landfall cards that I want to run with this are not only green. It is not mono green. That's why I say this is in the 99. And we have a different landfall commander like Phylith or someone else.
I would agree.
What are your thoughts on that? Yeah. Okay.
I think that makes sense. I actually see this more in I kind of went the opposite direction of you. Obviously, landfall makes total sense for this, but I was thinking in a Moltrotha, the Gravetide, sort of a graveyard matters, casting from the graveyard, getting things from the graveyard type of a deck. Yeah,
this would be amazing in a Zoni as well.
Mm-hmm. For sure. And moving on, now, I love this card. This is a phenomenal looking artwork. This is just a sweet ability here. So I'm going to go ahead and read it to you, and then I'll get your take on it, Levi, even though I've already probably skewed you a little bit here. Don't know how to pronounce this exactly, but we're going to go with Liesa, Forgotten Archangel. 2 of any color, 2 white, and a black to cast for a 4/5 flying lifelink legendary creature angel. Her ability is whenever another non-token creature you control dies, return that card to its owner's hand at the beginning of the next end step. If a creature an opponent controls would die, exile it instead. And the first thing that this reminds me of is Feather the Redeemed. Now, obviously, Feather is much more of a casting spells at your own creature and having those spells return. This is letting your creatures die, or assumingly sacrificing them in some respect, and then getting them back to your hand. Now, Levi, am I overhyping this card here?
I don't think so. This seems pretty bonkers. This slots into so many decks. This slots into Angels. This slots into White-Black Aristocrats. Slots into Teysa, which is a version of White-Black Aristocrats. Mm-hmm. I think this gets crazy broken. My only fear is that in Orzhov, a 5-mana card should do a lot, but I think this meets that requirements.
That's true. It is a high casting cost for Aristocrats-style decks, which are looking to really recast or somehow bring back and take advantage of the death of creatures. Usually we see a lot of things like Blood Artists and Teysa Karlov. I actually was thinking of this as a commander, but you make a good point that absolutely it would slot into a million different decks that are Aristocrats and Angels. I didn't even think about including it in a black and white Angels deck with all of the support from Kaldheim. I love the little text at the bottom, too, because I can't tell you how many times I need a card that hoses the graveyard in Historic Brawl, because, holy moly, I hate getting blown out by someone reanimating, a Tarask. Well, probably not a Tarask, but something like that.
Yeah, when they get a Craterhoof Behemoth back from the graveyard, it really hoses plans pretty quickly.
Yep.
So...
Very true.
Yeah. I think this card is pretty bonkers. My only thing is it super dies to super removal, and for, again, with that 5 mana casting cost in Orzhov, I think that's a big loss given how big of a target this is, but for how much work this card puts in, I think it slots in as commander and in the 99 in a lot of different decks.
Yeah. All right, that is the end of the commanders that we've seen so far. Next time, I think I'd like to talk about what we'd like to see in the 99 and potentially some other commanders that we see pop up here in our previews as preview season is in full swing here. Levi, closing thoughts on Innistrad Midnight Hunt.
I am so hyped for this set. The artwork, the autumn border, the fall theme of it, the Harvesttide Festival, the candlelit ceremonies that are going on in this, the story we've seen has spoiled so far. This entire set has me so excited. I can't wait for this to come out, and we get Crimson Vow, and I am just in a double dose of happy here. How about you, Blake?
I couldn't agree more. I love how the flavor of the actual storyline weaves itself into the day-bound and night-bound aspect of it. It's going to be amazing. I can't wait to talk about it more with you, Levi. All right. Thank you, everyone, for listening to our podcast. Stay tuned and look for more videos on Innistrad Midnight Hunt and more historic Brawl content.
Absolutely. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe. Really helps us out. Do a little dance. We mentioned that last time. The little dance is very important in this. It gets the YouTube algorithms working right, so we really appreciate it.